Thank you all again for joining us today. We're fortunate to have State Senator Larry Taylor as well as State Representative Ed Thompson joining us today. Each of them are going to provide a community update on behalf of their districts. And we know they don't need much of an introduction. They're obviously very involved in our community and we know them. But I did want to provide a brief introduction of each of them before they begin with their update. State Senator Larry Taylor was elected to the Texas Senate in 2012, and prior to serving in the Senate, he served 5 terms in the Texas House of Representatives. He currently serves as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Education, as well as a member of the Higher Education Committee, the Water and Rural Affairs Committee, and the Budget Writing Finance Committee. State Representative Ed Thompson, he was first elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 2012, and prior to his election to the Texas House, he served as Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Pearland, as well as a trustee for Pearland ISD. And his committee assignments today include the House Committee on Environmental Regulation, where he serves as our Vice Chairman, and he also serves on the House Committee on Transportation and House Committee on House Administration. So thank you, gentlemen, again for your time to join us today, and we look forward to the updates you'll provide. So I will turn it over to you, Senator Taylor.
All right, well, I'll just give you a real quick overview of where we are today as far as COVID goes. State of Texas is doing well relative to other countries and other states. And we're moving in the right direction. Real quick on the doing well, if you look at our death rate per 100,000 people, New York right now is about 150 deaths per 100,000 people. Florida, California have about 10, and Texas has about 5 per 100,000 people. So we're doing well, and we're also going in the right direction. As you know, we're well into our second phase now of opening up. The governor is walking a very fine line as far as trying to get this economy opened up, at the same time watching COVID, make sure we don't have a ramp up in the numbers. And that we've done very well there. Our 7-day average positivity rate, we're having you see a lot of the media reporting how many new cases we have. Well, that's because we're doing a lot more testing. We're up to about 25,000 tests a day. So yes, the case numbers are going up, but our positivity rate is going down. So of the people we've had tested, about 4.27% now on a 7-day average have tested positive this week. Last week, that was about 4.47. A week ago, it was 5.88. And back in April, about the middle of April, it was 13.86%. So those numbers are going down. That's a good sign. And they say that above 10% is where we need to have to go back and kind of relook at our opening up and maybe make some changes. So we're well below those numbers and trending in the right direction. So we've now had about over 855,000 Texans tested. And our average over that whole time for the positivity rate is about 6.7%. So well below, I think some areas of the country are about 15%. A lot are in the 10 range. So that's also a good number. And if you remember, we started this whole thing on making sure we didn't overwhelm the healthcare system. And there was a big push. We wanted to flatten the curve, not have people dying waiting to get care. Well, we stayed way ahead of that this whole time. We currently have in the hospital about 1,645 people out of 29 million people, by the way. That's down about 35 for the whole state over last week. And currently we have about 16,900 hospital beds available and about 1,864 ICU beds. So you see we're doing well as far as making sure we don't let this get out of control. I think the governor has done a good job of, we've got people on both ends of the spectrum. We've got some that don't think we should open up until the last COVID case is gone. And on the other end of the spectrum, you've got people saying we should just open wide open right now and pretend like there is no COVID. So he's walking and trying to balance that out. I think the phasing is a good way to do that. It serves several functions, but one of which is just to show people, as people are getting out, if our numbers don't go up significantly, people at home can have some more confidence that maybe they can join those people out there that are participating in the economy, which at this point we all understand. You're all Chamber of Commerce people. You understand how important it is to get this economy moving. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and I'm pleased with that.
Thank you for having me this afternoon. I really appreciate the opportunity. We've been very, very busy in our office. As Senator Taylor said, we're on a lot of conference calls and that sort of thing during the day, kind of keeping up to date with what's going on. As Senator Taylor talked about the phasing, we're in phase 2 right now. That will continue on. I'm not sure at what point phase 3 will trigger, but I know the governor and lieutenant governor and speaker, everyone's watching very closely the numbers, and as we move along and see how things are going, I echo what Senator Taylor said, is that I think the people of Texas have done a very good job of doing the social distancing and the things they need to do in order to keep us healthy through this pandemic that we're facing right now. Pretty much by the end of this month, there'll be a lot more open, a lot of things open that truthfully, I don't think a lot of us expected to be open, but some of the things that will take place, and we're seeing notification about water parks and summer camps and those sorts of things that will be opening. Schools are now June 1st would be able to open again. I don't think there's any real talk about doing that. And again, Senator Taylor could probably address that better than I could, him being the chair of education there in the Senate. But so far, I think that is proceeding along, and we're still seeing that. In fact, today I saw a PSA that the governor has worked with George Strait to put out. So I don't know when that's coming out, but it's a little thing that he's done, sort of like Don't Mess with Texas, but it has to do with COVID-19. So there's still awareness, there's still concern. I don't think it's a point where we can, as the senator said, drop our guard. I think we have to continue to guard through this, but I do think we're making progress, and I think we're seeing excellent numbers compared to what other states are doing. One of the things that I wanted to kind of talk real quick on is interim committees. House administration is working now to try and find some large enough committee rooms there to where we can possibly have some interim committee hearings. I think there's some things that we need to do prior to session, and we're kind of bumping up against a lot of time when people do start traveling. I don't know what this summer is going to look like for many, but we are, facing that. So I'm not sure. I don't have a timeline on that, but I know they are working on that to try and get those committee rooms available to where we can have some interim hearings. The other thing is the Department of Public Safety has reopened the driver's license offices, and they're doing it by appointment. So if you need a driver's license, these are new driver's licenses. If you currently have a license that's expired, you don't have to worry about it. You've got 60 days until they open completely up before you have to renew it. But if you're trying to get a new driver's license, CDL, that sort of thing, a permit, then you can go online and make that appointment. They are only doing it by appointment, so be sure that you're doing that. Liz and Molly in my office have been working diligently with constituents in our district, working on Texas Workforce, with the Texas Workforce Commission. We're really trying our best to help these folks get signed up. We were getting, I think one day Liz sent a list of about 50 people to the Workforce Commission that needed to be contacted, and that number is dropped off now. So that somewhat seems to have resolved there with the Workforce Commission. But we do have a lot of people that are still out of work, and that's one thing that, as Senator Taylor said earlier, we need to get our economy going again, and hopefully that will take place. Just kind of FYI, some of the numbers that we're seeing in Brazoria County, for example, we had a little over 10,000 people that had signed up for unemployment, and which is not I guess a huge number, but still, if you're one of those 10,000, that's quite a number of folks there. So we're trying to monitor that and keep up with it, and keep people also looking at that. One of the other things that the governor had announced was having a strike force to go in and work with our assisted living and our nursing homes. And they're doing that now. As many of you know, we had an outbreak, a pretty serious one at Windsong Village here in Pearland. And they have brought the Texas National Guard in, and they're helping with cleaning those facilities and trying to make that much safer for those folks that work there, and also those folks in that at-risk population. That is certainly one that we need to be cognizant of. I know that's one that have a lot of concern about, and one that I think if you look at that from a standpoint of where a lot of our deaths have come, they've come from folks that were in those nursing homes and those sorts of things. So something we need to be aware of, and to continue to help them as we move not only through this pandemic, but also through other natural disasters, because many times trying to move those folks and trying to care for them is difficult, because many of them are bedridden and they have very fragile health issues that need more care. I'm not good at this. Remdesivir, the drug, TDM is working with the producer of that drug to get that to the hospitals. I think the other day they had 1,200 vials that they received, and there was more on its way, but they're trying to distribute that out. It's been one of those that has helped patients that are suffering. The TDM has done a very good job of getting PPEs, masks, everything else that we needed during this period of time. So I'm very proud of them and what they've done. There's funding there for counties and cities, and we're working right now through the county extension agent, much like what we've done in previous catastrophes like Harvey and Ike, to where they're sort of the lead on this, and then they're allowing them to work through that, the cities and the counties, to try and get reimbursement for expenses that they've had during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had a teletown hall a few weeks ago and brought in some of the medical folks from Brazoria County, as well as Congressman Olson, and had a very good turnout for that. About 3,800 individuals joined in with us to hear a lot. This was early on in the pandemic, so it was really kind of on everyone. I mean, everyone was really focused on it at that point, but it was good to be able to get that information out to folks. One of the things real quickly I wanted to kind of talk about was some of the transportation projects we're still working on here. As many of you know, TxDOT hasn't slowed down. They're still working, and we've got some projects here in House District 29. The 288 corridor is still being worked on. Hopefully they're going to have the southbound portion of that open by mid-July, and the other portion, I think, by the end of the summer, the northbound. We went out the other day and went up on some of the flyovers, and it's really exciting to see what's going on there. Grand Parkway Segment B, Larry Bueller and City of Alvin, we've worked very closely with them, and that's still proceeding along. As many of you know, we got that back into the UTP, and so that is also, there's some activities that are going on, and we'll find out next steps on that, I think, here pretty quickly. At County Road 192 and 35, that's the Liverpool turnoff. They're going to be installing a light there. We worked with the mayor of Liverpool. He was concerned about accidents that were occurring. We had a TxDOT go out, and they did a study at that intersection, and it proved to be one that needed a traffic light, so that will slow that traffic a little bit down there and make that a little bit safer. In regards to 288, coming back to kind of the Iowa Colony area, as many of you know, County Road 63 was on the tip for construction, and 64 was not. And 64 is actually the intersection that is there where the new stadium and the transportation and where the new high school is being built out there. So we worked with the Transportation Policy Committee to flip those, if you will, to where now 64 is going to take precedence and get construction started on that sooner. So we're excited about that announcement that was made the other day at the TCP meeting, that they had agreed to do that. So that's quite exciting. And then last, on transportation, we've been working with the city of Alvin, with Larry and some folks there at the city in regards to a grade crossing there at 2nd Street for the railroad. I know that, Alvin can many times get the trains coming through there, and it's very difficult to traverse those. And so we've been working with BNSF and put the city in contact with them, and we're going to try and work on some grants and those sorts of things to see if we can move that along as well. I don't want to be a bearer of bad news, but June the 1st is hurricane season begins. So just FYI, everyone needs to start thinking about that. We had some bad weather yesterday, and that certainly kind of brought to my attention as an insurance agent, that is right around the corner. So heaven forbid, I'm praying that we don't have to deal with that here, but that is something we need to be aware of and need to be preparing for, and letting folks know about making lists and getting those items that they need, because we saw during the pandemic some of the runs that were on the grocery stores. I don't know if toilet paper will be on the run for hurricane preparedness, but now's maybe a good time to start sort of preparing for that as well. So, and if you do want, we do have a capital review that we do every, now we're doing it every 2 weeks. You can sign up for that on our website at edthompson29.com. We also, certainly you can do us through, get in touch with us through that website or through Facebook and Twitter and all the other social media things. So thank y'all for allowing me to be a part of this and to bring you up to date on some of the things we're working on.
Thank you both, and thank you for your leadership, not only during such a difficult time for our communities and our state, but just your leadership in general in the past as well. One thing y'all both touched on is obviously the economic impact to our state that COVID-19 has had. And Senator Taylor, I wanted to transition back over to you and see if you might could speak to the budget and the challenges we're going to face next legislative session as it relates to the budget.
Well, one of the most important things we could do right now is getting our economy going again, because what we're dealing with now, Texas is not just dealing with COVID, as you know, we're also an energy state. And so we've gotten the double whammy with the oil and gas prices, the way they've gone. So that's going to make our session very difficult. I will say this will be my third budget session. I mean, we have a budget every session, obviously, but when I say a budget session, it's when we don't have a lot of money. In fact, we have a shortfall. My very first session in 2003, we were facing a $10 billion budget shortfall. And then, if you'll remember, we had the economic collapse of 2008. And but in the 2009 session, if you remember, the federal government put out a big stimulus program. So our budget really wasn't as tight in 2009, but the economy was very slow in recovering. And by 2011, it had not recovered. The federal money had run out, and then we had another difficult budget session. And that was a $17 billion shortfall. When I say shortfall, we're required by our Constitution to have a balanced budget. Our comptroller comes up with a revenue estimate at the beginning of session, and that's how much money we have to spend. And we were a lot shorter than what our normal expenses were when those revenue estimates go down. Being an energy state, we don't get any property taxes at the state level. Our number one funding source comes from sales taxes. Obviously, when the economy is slow to the point it's been slow here, we're going to have significantly less in sales taxes, but also oil and gas brings in another significant part, not the largest part, but a significant part of our revenues come from oil and gas, but they also help pay sales taxes. So it's kind of a double hit. You know, the severance tax, I think, is about 10%, but the sales tax is about 6% of our revenues that come in from general revenue. So those two are going to be hit. We have received a lot of federal money so far, and there's talk that there may be more coming. So I tell people there's more unknowns at this time. They outnumber the knowns by a large number. How long does COVID continue? What happens with oil prices? Of course, the oil industry had a double whammy as well. At the same time, the demand was going down due to COVID. We had an oversupply issue caused by Russia and Saudi Arabia having a little price war over there. And who's going to control that part of the world? And they've oversupplied at the same time the demand was down. So hopefully we can get that corrected fairly quickly. The oil and gas in the last week or two has bounced back a little bit. But just to give you an idea, our revenue estimate for this budget that we're in right now was estimated the oil price would be about $60 a barrel. And you've seen them hovering in the 20s, and at one point they were actually zero and negative. So that doesn't bode well. But so this coming session, we're expecting it to be down. We don't know to what extent. The comptroller will give us a revised revenue estimate in July, mid-July. That's for the budget that we're in, and also kind of gives an idea to set us up for next session. We'll get the final revenue estimate right before we start session in January. So we'll just have to, buckle down. The governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker have asked our state agencies to already start, reducing their expenses 5% and not spending any money you don't have to try to be prepared for the next budget and what we're facing. We have a couple of advantages over a lot of other places, though. We have an economic stabilization fund in Texas, commonly called the Rainy Day Fund. This Rainy Day Fund is larger than 48 other states combined. Every other state but Alaska combined is less than our $8.5 billion we have. Alaska has a larger Rainy Day Fund. And I think it's important to remind people, every session, if we have money left over, or if there's money in the Rainy Day Fund, or even in difficult times, people want us to spend that money every time. But we've been very disciplined to not spend that Rainy Day Fund down when we didn't have to. We did spend quite a bit after Harvey. It was up around $13 billion or so before Harvey. We had to spend it for Harvey. Obviously, that was an economic event as well, of biblical proportions. But we did not spend it all, and we've been very careful to only spend it on one-time expenses when they had to be done. So thank goodness we have those funds available now, because we are going to need some of those funds to get through this next budgetary cycle. So the budget's going to be challenged. I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm predicting to be another shortfall like we've had before. And this is where it's good to have some experience with people that have been there before to lead us through this. I'm very optimistic we're going to get through this. Our unemployment, I don't know if you saw that, but Texas, I think, is about 12.8% in April. Doesn't even include May. I think May, they're maybe up to 19-20%, which is a record. I think back in 2008, the record was like 9.8% unemployment. But our 12.8 still looks better than the almost 15%, which is a nationwide average. But we've got some real challenges ahead of us in the budget. But we will balance our budget, and we'll do it. But we just may have to, not do things that we were planning on doing right away. May have to be put off for a little bit to get things going again. But we're going to get through this. It's just going to be very challenging. Can I say one more thing about the DMV? How many people would like to get an appointment to go see DMV versus going waiting in line for an hour? And this is huge. This is one of those things that's had to happen. But there's going to be some improvements coming out of COVID. What we've learned from this, the idea that DMV, you can make an appointment and they'll come out to your car and tell you when it's time to come in versus staying in line for an hour, hour and a half. That's been one of the continuing things that Ed and I hear all the time is about DMV and the lines. We put substantial money into that. I'm not sure if it's the black hole or what, trying to fix that problem. But here, COVID, they're finally going online and finally doing some appointments. And we're going to see improvements like that throughout the system. As well as in education, which I'm happy to talk about a little later if you'd like.
Yeah, I was going to have you transition to that. That's obviously another area that has been dramatically impacted due to COVID-19. And a lot of us here on the call today have personally been impacted in transitioning to teachers in our own homes. And kudos to all of our school districts who, literally overnight had to come up with entirely new ways to teach their students and, teach our children. So, I just wanted to know what you all have been hearing from our school districts through this, and kind of, what is education going to look like going into the future, particularly now that a lot of us are set up with the technology necessary to do the distance learning.
Well, I tell you, this is one of those areas where I see a silver lining to all this. We've been trying to get schools to move into more, having some more technology for their students and those kind of capabilities for a long time. And, we used to have what we call the textbook allotment, and we changed that to instructional materials, allow them to use some of that money rather than buying textbooks, buying devices that can have so much richer materials on them than just a textbook. And then that really wasn't taking off well, so we actually changed it this last session to technology instructional materials allotment, and we required that they spend 25% on technology. Several things we did in previous sessions led up to this to at least make us in a better position to handle what just happened. Second thing we did was we got an E-rate grant through the federal government. We spent $20 million of state money to get a $200 million grant of federal money to get all of our campuses across the entire state having broadband access. That was 2 sessions ago. And my understanding right now we're at 98.3% of our schools in Texas have broadband access, which is good to have it on the campus. We need to get to 100%. But what we found here in this last COVID, we've been working on trying to close the gaps for years. Lower income kids tend to fall behind those who are not low income. Minorities in many cases, or English language learners, there's a big educational gap. We've been trying to close those gaps, and we've made progress on that, but now COVID has exposed a whole nother gap, and it's the connectivity gap. And so when we went 100% distance learning for our schools, I've got to give it to our schools. Very commendable. They did that in about 2 weeks. Had to go to 100% distance learning from a traditional classroom setting to 100% distance learning. They were able to do that in about 2 weeks with help from TEA. And obviously we've learned a lot of lessons there. A lot of them weren't as prepared, we know. Some schools already had one-to-one devices. Each student had a device, and they'd already been doing some of the blended learning, which is using technology as well as classroom teachers. So they were had a little bit ahead of the curve. But we've learned that we've got to get all these kids devices. We every year, a lot of people don't realize this, we have campuses across Texas that close every year for flu. When they've had a significant flu outbreak, they'll close the campus for a period of time. Well, now with these distance learning capabilities, those campuses don't have to slow down. They can continue educating those kids during the downtime. But also for our kids, being able to catch up. We have helping close the gaps. A lot of times is not using the traditional school day or traditional school hours. With online resources, these kids can continue to learn later in the day or even on non-traditional school days and help them get caught up. But we all also have learned that we've got to have teachers prepared to learn in this environment. So that's a lot of professional development. I've talked to a number of our superintendents. They're really stressing because they know there's going to be, I hadn't talked about the start of the school year, but there's going to be some form of distance learning even next year. So when you talk to schools, what they're preparing for now is 3 different scenarios. I'm kind of hearing we're going to start about mid-August, like most people are sticking with the dates they have, which is pretty close to mid-August. But they're preparing for 3 different scenarios. One, which is unlikely, is we go right back to traditional classroom schools. Probably not going to happen. Even if you had it for the majority of the kids that could do that, you're going to have some kids due to either a parental situation with health issues at home, or the parents are just afraid they're not going to go back to school. The other scenario that's probably not as likely is we still have 100% distance learning. I think we'll be further along than that. We're probably going to end up with some kind of a hybrid, somewhat mix of classrooms with distance learning where the kids can either come in alternate days or half days. So you're allowed to have some more distancing between kids during the day. Yeah, and they still have that face time because it's very important, particularly in our younger ages, to have that face time for our kids. So I think you'll see somewhat of a hybrid on that. But this is an opportunity. We've been trying to get schools to move into using more technology in the classroom in that, the blended learning. And I think this is a great opportunity. They've seen it, and teachers are realizing the value of it. And once you've been there, I don't think you just step back and go back the way you used to do it all along. So we've got to get one devices. The connectivity is a big deal. Having 98.3% of our campuses is great. We need to get to 100%, but then you've also got to have 100% connectivity for every student. And that I was put on a group with the governor and TEA. It's connectivity, and we're trying to have 100% of all of our kids having access to device and Wi-Fi hotspot or some access to the internet, and that'll help close that connectivity gap we have. But I see that as a silver lining in all this. We are going to move education forward into the 21st century and really embrace the advantages it gives us, but still taking advantage of the classroom and the face-to-face from our teachers.
Representative Thompson, do you have anything to add in terms of the education front?
Well, no, I think Senator Taylor covered it very well. I think one of the things that will be somewhat of a challenge will be the transportation side of it. As you try and load kids on buses, then how many do you get on there? What do you do about that? So I agree with him. I think there's going to be challenges that are beyond the classroom that we'll be dealing with as we attempt to get back to school as we knew it. I don't know that we'll get back to the way that it was prior to this pandemic, but there are a lot of logistical challenges out there, and I agree with the senator in the fact that one of the problems is the connectivity. We've got that little place in Hallettsville, and I mean it's almost impossible to get a signal out there, and I think about those kids that live out in that area, how difficult it is for them to they can't download anything with the internet system that they've got out there. It's about like DSL, it's so poor. And so that's the sort of thing I think we've got to try and figure out. How do we do that? Do we do hotspots in parking lots and things like that where people can go and connect and download and do the things they need to do and then maybe go home and work on it? I don't know. Those are going to be challenges that I think we'll all have to work through and try and come up with different ways. And, I always say, the great thing about Texas is that it's so big and so diverse. And the bad thing about Texas is that it's so big and so diverse, because with one thing that works for everyone is next to impossible. And so it's going to be a real challenge. I think it's going to be a challenge, but it's one that, the old saying, if you want something fixed, tell a Texan it's impossible. So we'll get it done.
And if I could add to that, we spend more money on education than we do anything else in the budget between higher ed and public education. And there's been a concentrated effort to make sure we continue to make sure that our educational system is funded. We increased our funding quite a bit last session with House Bill 3, and there's a real concerted effort to make sure we follow through on that. It's put into the formulas. That was not a grant, so it's in the system. And we're getting some federal dollars coming in for it. Some of it specific for education, some of it can be used for education. And the governor and the legislative budget board are making efforts to make sure that goes into education. We don't want this health crisis to become a generational educational problem. And if you think about kids, particularly in our younger grades, they will now have been off school for about 6 months. We always have a summer slide when the kids are away, but now we've got a COVID slide combined with a summer slide. And this is where we can use the distance learning things we've learned that to make sure we kind of help get these kids caught back up, because it's just so important these early grades to get these kids. For example, having kids read at the third grade level by the end of the third grade is so important for the future of their education. We found that's one of the biggest indicators of their educational achievement from that point forward is whether or not they could read at third grade level by the end of third grade. If you think about it, it makes sense, because it's up to third grade, you're learning to read. And from the third grade on, you're reading to learn. So if these kids aren't there, then they obviously have a difficult time from that point forward. So we don't want to have these kids fall through the cracks and cause generational problems because we can't get it done during this time. But I think the tools are there. We just got to learn how to use them. We got to give our teachers professional development to help get the most out of what we have available to us now. So I'm encouraged with that.
Well, thank you both for your time today. I think that concludes the time that we have for the updates. And as always, thank you for your support of the Alvin-Manville Area Chamber of Commerce and all that you do for our communities. And we certainly know if folks are having issues, whether it be with the Texas Workforce Commission or other state agencies, they can certainly reach out to your offices for assistance. So thank you again for joining us today and for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank y'all very much. Appreciate the opportunity to visit. Hang in there.
Thank y'all.